I am super excited about this episode. So, a few days ago, I listened to this fascinating Harvard Business School podcast called Why Time Away May Be the Future of Work. I found so much relevance in it, and I'm inspired that we are finally seeing a change in how we think about work. Because when I think about my career, I feel like for years we have celebrated people who work and work and work and grind their way through burnout, never take extended time off, and somehow their exhaustion becomes, well, a professional achievement. Meanwhile, I've now spent years helping people design lives that include intentional time away through travel. And the reasons that they do it are not about laziness or hating to work. It's because sometimes the smartest thing you can do for your career is to step away from it for a while. The Harvard researchers make the case that extended breaks may become an important part of the future of work. And I agree. But I also think they missed a really important piece. So today I want to talk about what they got right and why I believe a travel reset isn't just good for your career, it can change your life. Hello, and welcome to How to Travel Full-Time, the podcast about how to use travel to create a life that feels more like your own. I'm your host, certified professional coach, TEDx speaker, and New York Times featured travel reset catalyst, Heather Markel. I'm excited to help you lean into your own transformative travel experience with tips, real-life stories, and strategies from someone who's been living the travel lifestyle since 2018. Let's jump in. For decades now, most of us have inherited the same kind of life blueprint. You're supposed to graduate from college, get a job, work continuously for like 40-ish years, retire, and then you can finally enjoy your life. Maybe that made sense when careers were shorter. Industries changed slowly, and people often stayed with one employer for decades. In fact, when I left my job at AT&T, most of the retirees that I knew were still considered lifers. But none of that is true anymore. Many of us will work well into our 60s and even 70s. AI is changing jobs faster than any technology that we've seen yet. Entire industries are evolving rapidly. So the idea that you will simply work without interruption or work for the same company until you retire no longer makes much sense. Instead, maybe our careers need chapters. So we have periods of intense work, periods of learning, periods of reinvention, and sometimes periods of stepping away. Now, the stepping away does not make someone less committed. And in fact, it may actually make them more adaptable. I've also noticed there's been a shift in the acceptability of taking career breaks. When I took mine, people frankly thought I was nuts, but now it's becoming a trend, especially for people in their 40s and 50s. One part of the Harvard discussion really resonated with me. They talked about burnout, but here's where I'd add something from my own experience. There was a point in my corporate career when I would feel that sort of constant exhaustion and dissatisfaction with my career. And when it happened, which was often, I would keep telling myself, oh, Heather, you just need a vacation. And maybe you've done that too. I wonder if one of these sounds like your broken record phrase. How about, if I can just get through this project? If I can just survive until Christmas. If I can just make it until my next vacation. Except for me, every vacation would become like another countdown. I'd return to work from that vacation, and immediately I'd feel like that vacation was a dream that never happened. The stress would quickly return, and I jumped right back into the exhaustion and frustration with no end in sight except another vacation. And so eventually I realized something uncomfortable. I wasn't tired because I needed a better vacation. I was tired because the life that I had built no longer fit the person that I had become. Now, that realization did not mean that I immediately quit my job. No. And it didn't mean that I had everything figured out. But what it did mean is that I finally stopped normalizing my burnout and ignoring it. Instead, I started to treat it like information. Because sometimes burnout is not telling us we're weak. It may be pushing us to ask a much bigger question. What needs to change? For me, this was definitely a process. And unfortunately, I had tried to stuff down my feelings for so long that they finally surfaced as a pain in my chest. Thank goodness I was able to use that pain as a wake-up call and actually take the action I needed to plan a break from my career. At the time, I realized I had about 20 years left to that career, and I just could not spend the rest of it feeling like I was just waiting for retirement. It was at this point that I wished that there had been a resource like me to help me sort out the identity challenges that I was facing. So here's where I think extended travel becomes different from simply taking time off. Taking time off in itself is helpful, but changing your environment is transformative. When you wake up somewhere completely different, your routines disappear. The expectations other people have of you disappear. The constant anxieties and inner thoughts that are just swarming in your head begin to calm down. And suddenly your brain starts asking different questions like, who am I when nobody knows my job title? What actually makes me happy? And let me tell you, when I first asked myself that question about happiness and realized I had never asked myself that, it was a real wake-up call. And then, do I even want to go back to my life exactly as it was? Travel creates distance. Distance creates perspective, and perspective changes decisions. That's why I don't help people plan trips. I help them create enough space to address the identity issues and use the travel to create the change they're craving. Now, if all of this sounds appealing, you might ask, why don't more people do it? And usually it's 4 things that get in the way: money, career, fear, and identity. People assume they can't afford it. They worry that they'll never get another job. They're afraid people will think they're irresponsible, or they simply don't know who they'll be if they're not constantly working. Ironically, those are exactly the questions that become easier to answer once you create enough distance to see your life clearly. And that's why planning matters. A travel reset is not reckless. Done well, it's one of the most intentional decisions you can make. So listening to that Harvard Business School podcast made me optimistic because conversations like this are finally becoming mainstream. We're beginning to question the old idea that success means working continuously until retirement. And instead, maybe success looks more like building a life that has room for rest, reinvention, curiosity, and growth. If you have been hearing that voice inside your head telling you something needs to change, or feeling pain and that bad feeling in your gut, don't ignore it. You don't have to blow up your career. You don't have to sell everything. You don't even have to know exactly what comes next. You simply need to give yourself permission to imagine that another chapter is possible. And that's exactly what a travel reset is designed to do. If you'd like help figuring out what that could look like for you, I'd love to see you at my free webinar where I'll talk you through the framework I use to help professionals plan a travel reset without sacrificing the security that they have spent decades building. Check out the show notes for registration information. Because sometimes the most productive thing that you can do is step away long enough to discover what you're really moving towards. Thank you for listening, and I'll talk to you next week. Thanks for listening. If this episode got you wanting more information about how to create the space for a travel reset, I invite you to visit the Travel Reset Planning Library. You'll find practical resources to help you explore where to go, what your reset could look like, how to afford it, and how to start planning without creating 17 spreadsheets and a small emotional support binder. You'll find the link to it in the show notes. And be sure to follow the podcast so you don't miss the next episode. Until then, remember, you don't have to blow up your future to create space for a future that fits you better.